Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a final video covering the major unit changes in this upcoming Waaagh patch. And in this video we are going to highlight what I consider are the major changes. I'm not going to touch on every sort of change in cost or the +1, -1 melee attack, melee defense, that sort of thing, or not necessarily touching on major mechanics. But what we will be touching on is some of the major unit changes and how they might impact the game. We're going to try to go through it quickly and hopefully a bit efficiently. And we are going to kick things off with the greenskins, who probably received the most changes and most rework in this patch. And that kind of makes sense. The patch, after all, did focus on them. So first and foremost, of course, the head honcho here, we do have Grimgor, who's gotten some massive tweaks, and really he's gotten some massive new items and abilities. First and foremost, Bloodforged armor. This is a explosion that he gets to generate. It's much in the similar vein to Cetra's Wrath of Dra or Khalida's Venomous Wave or that sort of thing, where it's a detonation, disrupts opponents near him, causes a little bit of damage, and does grant Grimgor an extra 30 armor, making him a little beefier for a temporary amount of time. It also has a pretty low cooldown, so it's something you can use pretty often, and allows Grimgor to sort of barrel through opponents a little bit more efficiently. I do think it's a nifty little perk. I think it's something that helps solve one of Grimgor's primary issues, which is actually staying on a target. Obviously, it isn't helped by his speed and his relatively low max. The fact that he's a foot character just makes it a little difficult for him, but this I think will help him quite a lot in that aspect, and I think this was a pretty decent, fair improvement all in all. Get Snake unchanged, of course, as is Get Back here. However, he does now get though it used to be Fighter the Stand Your Ground, which has been removed for orcs now. He now also gets your Next. Now, this is an ability I'm a little less thrilled about. In my opinion, Grimgor's weakness was already being exaggerated quite a bit before this patch hit. People often say that he's a meme pick, but honestly, Grimgor's not as bad as a lot of people were saying, and this is one thing that I'm a little concerned about. It's a significant debuff, -48% speed, which, keep in mind, snares stacks on top of the other snares greenskins get. -40 melee defense, -24 melee attack. And I think this is going to make it very difficult for a lot of characters to try to dive or poke or jab at the greenskins. It's one of several new snare mechanics for the greenskins that I think is going to encourage even heftier kite play, which I'm honestly not a huge fan of. I don't like the fact that a faction essentially is going to be forcing kite play out of its opposition, no matter what the situation. And obviously Grimgor had his issues, but I think the thing is, this isn't really going to make Grimgor better at Lord Slamping. It's going to make Grimgor the snare that enables other units like Ragnarok Spiders or, well, probably not Idols in most matchups, but Boar Boys or Nasty Skulkers or whatever to kill stuff. And so I'm not a huge fan of it. Stacking on top of Poison, you've got your opponent down by a good 70% of their mobility. And this is pretty brutal stuff. And yeah, I'm not the hugest fan. Though I think on Grimgor it's the least egregious, just because he is a pretty pricey lord, and he is obviously dedicated to combat, so you do need to bring caster and all that. Finally, he does get Best of the Best. This is another bit of a questionable addition, at least in, I don't mind it in campaign, but in and same thing, honestly, any of these in campaign I think are fine, but in multiplayer, it boosts an already very tanky Grimgor to even higher levels of tankiness, and once again, I think it encourages people to just kite and avoid Grimgor, which was already kind of the case, and now it's going to be exacerbated, and even more so. So I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of it, even though I do like the notion of him being a somewhat better duelist and better fighter. I just don't necessarily think this is the best way to go about it. Next up, we do have the Night Goblin. I will touch on the Legendary Lords, and we'll touch on non-legendaries later. Scarsnake. So Scarsnake is generally the similar. He did get Vanguard, which is cool. Now you're going to be able to do some sneaky Vanguard shenanigans with your Gobos, which is awesome. I love it. The Spite of the Bad Moon got changed. It used to be a expert charge defense and shield bonus buff, or shield buff. Now it is +16 bonus for large and 25% more weapon strength, which I think is great. I don't mind that at all. It doesn't last too long. It is something that's targetable. It's not simply an AoE around him. But I think it's nice. It lets you soup up a critical engagement, and since Scarsnake is footbound, the extra range on the cast is definitely nifty. What I'm the Trixie Traps as well as Scarstic Spotter remain the same, but what I'm really concerned about and I'm really not a big fan of is the Fermented Fungi. And this has been added for both Scarsnakes as well as the Night Goblin War Boss. Forget it. We're just going to highlight both of them at the same time here. But they both do get the Fermented Fungi. I'm not a huge fan of that because it's a 36-second minus 24 melee defense and Rampage. Now, Rampage, as I've covered extensively before, only procs when a unit is below 75% HP, when a unit has lost 25% of its HP. So it's not something that you just point and click someone and they Rampage, but it's not hard to knock 25% off a character. If you hit them with a Vindictive Glare or something, or a couple of Vindictive Glares, boom, your opponent is now below 75% HP. You drop a Fermented Fungi on them, and now they're rampaging into your troops, and you can tear them apart. So I'm very much not a fan of it with Scarsnake. I'm even less of a fan of it with the Night Goblin War Boss, who also gets the Tormentor Sword, so you've got snares on snares, and that's just disgusting in my opinion. It's very, very brutal. So it's something I'm not hugely fond of. I wish at least the duration on it was a bit shorter, since 36 seconds is pretty insane. Like 20 seconds or something I think would be more fair. But yeah, 36 seconds is just nuts, and and the Greenskins already have boatloads of snares. It's not like the faction was not already swimming in snares to begin with, so the addition of more snares is just nuts. Night Goblin War Boss also did get the Boss's Loons. This is a pretty nifty, ability here. It's basically the normal Night Goblin Fanatic Loons. It's got shorter range. It's only got 15-meter range rather than the usual 30, and casts out some loonies. So and that was the change for the Night Goblin Fanatics as well here. So if we actually, I guess because it's AI controlled, we won't see it. But now Fanatics are controllable. And that is a little bit of a boost against enemy infantry. And I think once again it's discouraging any sort of straight up engagement with Greenskins. But I don't necessarily mind this as much as I do the Fermented Fungi. Next up, we do have Waaagh the Slaughterer, who has received several buffs. Melee defense up to 32 from previous 24 on Skullmuncher. I think that's a fair buff, honestly. The melee defense of 24 on Skullmuncher was kind of a meme. He also now gets Waagh's Art Armor, which is a nice buff to armor and melee defense. Makes him a little beefier and helps allies nearby stick around, which I don't personally mind. And the Slag of Slashes, which is also a buff that requires you to be in an AoE. I think it's not as powerful as one would think, since Waaagh is pretty flimsy. You don't necessarily want him like near a fight all the time. You're often darting in and out of an area and not sticking around for too long. So I think that while these buffs are very powerful, and on paper especially they look insanely good, I do think, and combined with Get On With It, I think Waaagh will be a very strong leadership buff in some cases. I do at the same time think it's not going to be as overtuned as one might think, just because Waaagh is best used diving in and out of combat and avoiding engagement. So I'm not too concerned about it. But I do think it's interesting to see that he got a buff, because he was already a very strong character. Next up, the Goblin Big Boss. This is probably one of the most controversial and probably, in my opinion, one of the most ill-advised buffs in multiplayer. Certainly with how cheap it is. And that is the implementation of They Need Stabbing. This is a new ability that was added to the Goblin Big Boss. You can get in the campaign. It's something you unlock in your skill tree. It's a 24 melee defense and 30 armor debuff to Lords and Heroes, which is not too crazy, but the Goblin Big Boss costs basically nothing. This is a character that is dirt cheap. It costs pennies, essentially. You can get him on a wolf for less than 500 gold with They Need Stabbing. On a spider, he's just shy of 600 with They Need Stabbing. So you can get an insanely cheap debuff that has very good speed, and in the case of the spider, has poison. And his combat stats are not great. Obviously, 360 weapon strength, that's not amazing, and 50 melee attack. It's not even 50, it's like 46, because right now he's getting buffed. Actually, it's even less, it's 40. He's getting buffed by Slag and Slash a whole bunch. So he doesn't have the best combat stats, but he's so cheap, and you can bring two of them, that this is going to be some brutal stuff. And once again, it's just stacking on top of this meta of never engaging the Greenskins in a fair fight or in anything resembling like a real fight. You just avoid them as long as you can and shoot them to death. And I don't like that push. I don't think this was a necessary buff to the Goblin Big Boss. Goblin Big Boss is already a character you saw a decent amount. I don't mind it in campaign, but in multiplayer, I think it's a bit much, especially with how cheap it is. This should at very least be an expensive spell ability, and if the feeling is that you're always going to bring the Goblin Big Boss with this item, then the Goblin Big Boss's price should go up. He should simply not be that cheap. It's just, I think, a bit egregious, especially because it can stack with other debuffs, and so you can get such an insane debuff chain on enemies. It's just very brutal. Then we do have the Night Goblin Fanatics. Now these guys got a pretty insane buff because now the Fanatics are actually aimable. You do have a 30-meter range, so it's not crazy good range, but you can actually aim your Fanatics now, which I think is good. The problem is that now you're basically guaranteed good value against enemy infantry, once again discouraging any sort of infantry fight. This is going to be nightmare fuel for dwarves, I think. And you can, it looks kind of ridiculous. It basically guarantees you value, especially on the 8-peak loonies. I think on the 8-peak loonies, who only went up in cost by 50 and are, unless you have a really short game, are almost guaranteed to get all their casts off, it's just insane. That you get, because 8-peak loonies do a lot of damage. It's not quite, say, Wind Blast levels, but it's close, and you hit a tight formation of infantry, and you devastate them. So the loons of 8 peaks, as well as the normal loons, do insane amounts of damage. On the normal Night Gobos, I think it's a little overtuned because they have such bad leadership that they're pretty easy to rout, and so they often will not get value of more than one spinning loon, sometimes maybe not even one spinning loon. Whereas with the 8-peak loonies, I think it's just straight up overpowered by several hundred gold. Like, this was already a unit that was arguably overpowered, and this just makes it more so. So I'm very much, well, I like the changes to loonies to make them more viable. I do not like the fact that they're so stupidly powerful now, and they can just devastate an infantry line very, very easily, and really just throw a game into, throw your opponent to disarray and remove, and there's no friendly fire risk really, and there's no real counterplay to it besides terror routing these units before they reach your line, which doesn't even apply to the 8-peak loonies, so just very much not a fan of that. Boar Boy Big Guns, well, all boars got plus 10 armor. I'm just highlighting it here on the Boar Boy Big Guns. I'm okay with that for most units. Not the hugest fan of it on the Orc Boar Boy Big Guns, who already had a respectable 75 armor. I actually like it on the Regiment round. I think they did deserve more armor, but because that's their unique shtick over normal Boar Boy Big Guns. But on the normal Orc Boar Boy Big Guns, I think 75 armor was fine. I think the unit was in a solid balancing spot already. I think the 10 armor is going to make them even better than they already were at crushing non-AP cav, and will certainly make them much sturdier against spears, which they were always kind of weak against. But I'm not the hugest fan. I think it's good on the other boards who just have very low armor regardless, but on the Boar Boy Big Guns, I think it could have stayed at 75. Honestly, maybe on all the boars it could have stayed at 75, except maybe the vanilla boars because they're kind of crap. Finally, spiders. I actually like this change. They've dropped from 150 armor to 120. It makes them much more manageable for non-AP factions. They did get a compensation in the form of more HP, as well as more melee attack. So this will make them beefier against factions that have lots of AP missiles, like Dwarves, Empire, Wood Elves maybe, though we probably would never bring this against Wood Elves, but, you know, might as well mention them. They have a lot of AP missiles. But the less reduced armor will make them a lot more susceptible to non-AP missiles. So factions like Bretonia, or even High Elves and factions like that, who traditionally struggle with the Ragnarok Spiders, will now have a little bit of counterplay available to them. And I do think that is a solid and respectable improvement to the Spider, or a good change to the Spider balance-wise, since it offers more counterplay but doesn't just cripple the unit entirely. So definitely looking forward to see this in action. I think it's a fair change, but there are definitely some causes for concern here. We're going to look at some more greenskin units because there's a few other lords that got changes, of course, and so we're going to look at those in just a second. But I do think that especially the loonies and the plethora of point and click debuffs that the greenskins are now getting is a significant cause for concern. And so yeah, we're gonna hop on over to another round of some greenskins, talk about that. So the other two greenskin lords that obviously got changes were the Orc War Boss as well as the Goblin Great Shaman. The Orc War Boss simply got a new ability or replacement of Stand Your Ground with Smash Him Faster. This is an AoE 24 melee attack and 16 leadership buff. It's really nothing crazy good. And honestly, I think the poor Orc War Boss, it's really come out the loser in this patch, because everybody else in the Greenskin roster has gotten some massive boosts to their performance. And this poor guy is still kind of floating along on his Wyvern with now a slight melee attack buff, with no real gimmick to his name. So I'm not entirely sure why he got so overlooked. There's nothing going for the poor guy, really. I'm a little disappointed there. But on the bright side, I don't think there's much risk of this guy being really overtuned. He might be a little better at supporting cavalry or something with that extra melee attack, but it's not, I think, a character you're really going to see much of on the battlefield. The other one who did get a major change is, of course, the Great Shaman, who gets the new free LC mount that you can get at Total War Access, the Arachnarok Spider. Weirdly enough, the Arachnarok Spider the Shaman gets did not get the same the same armor change. Instead, it he kept the 150 armor and didn't gain HP. So I'm not entirely sure what the reasoning there was. If this is something that C is simply overlooked and planning to change, but regardless, that is the case there. He also did get a new ability, Don't Even Try It, which is basically a, well, cheap Arcane Unforging. It's not the most powerful ability ever. It's kind of like a little bit like Spirit Leech or something. But it does add 15-second ability recharge, which is a solid penalty. So it's not a bad ability. It gives you a little more utility with your Goblin Great Shaman, lets you deny your opponent some ability spam. A little strange that the Goblin Great Shaman does get 150 armor, and the Spider here isn't changed, but I'm not super concerned with the changes here. I think it should remain relatively balanced, though certainly he's probably going to be pretty strong with some Greenskin Death Balls, especially now that you actually use Curse of the Bad Moon now, since I believe there should no longer be friendly fire on the spell's negative effects. It's going to make stuff like the Nasty Curse here much stronger. So in a Death Ball, this guy could be quite the menace. I'm definitely excited to see how he performs. Next up, we do have the High Elves, and the High Elves gains are honestly much more meager. There really isn't as much to touch upon here. But a few new mounts have been added, of course, with the DLC, and there have been some significant changes to the White Line, so we're going to touch on those. So first and foremost, both the Prince as well as the Princess, who I don't have here, but both of them did get the Griffin mount. Same as Eltharion. Now this, I think, is actually a nifty little boost because it gives you a rather cheap combat character with AP as well as Fear and Terror. Obviously you lose out on the breath attack from the dragon, but it's a much cheaper unit than a dragon. And you also do get more armor than a Sun Dragon or a Moon Dragon would get. So they are it does give you a sort of cheap combat mount option. And weirdly enough, I do think that is actually I do think that's a useful perk. Unfortunately, the Prince and Princess just aren't such popular Lord picks to begin with, and I don't see this offsetting that a huge amount. But being able to get some cheap terror and choosing the lore you want because you now have to bring Caster rather than Eltharion, who has a high magic. I could see that having a little bit of a niche, and I could see it seeing some use, especially with the Princess, who's something you occasionally see. Now, the more egregious, and something that I really am not a fan of, is Teclis, who has now gotten the Arcane Phoenix mount. And where the Arcane Phoenix itself and the Regiment of Renown are kind of crap, Teclis on the Arcane Phoenix, while very expensive, is insanely strong. He also has had changes to the Sword of Teclis, which unfortunately I forgot to bring here, but it's essentially a second Arcane Conduit. It gives him even more Winds of Magic. It means that Teclis basically cannot run out of Winds of Magic. Stack that on top of the Phoenix, and he is an absolute insane beefcake. And he might look a little flimsy here, only 40 melee defense, 5300 HP, 50 armor, but he's got some crazy resistances. You get the 70% fire resist because you're Phoenix. You get the baked in 15% missile resist because you're a Lord. You get 20% physical resist because it's an Arcane Phoenix. And then on top of that, you do get the Attuned to Magic, which is another 12% ward save when your Winds of Magic is over 50%, which, because Teclis has essentially infinite Winds of Magic, is not that hard to maintain. It's actually pretty darn easy, even at default with just Greater Arcane Conduit, much less with the Sword of Teclis, which has gotten reworked. And on top of that, he does, of course, get the Potion of Koroi. So if you happen to be getting beaten up, you have 4 charges of 44% ward save. So against physical attacks, that means you're looking at 76% save if you got the Potion of Koroi popped. Against physical missiles, you're looking at 88% ward save, so almost maxed out. Essentially, sorry, you're actually looking at max ward save against physical missiles. So yeah, you're maxed out 90%. When you've got the Potion of Koroi popped, of course. But even without it, you're still looking at 47% ward save against physical missiles for much of a game, which is just insane. And that's not factoring in armor, or the fact that you're healing from Potion of Kuroi, or the fact that you can heal yourself with the regrowth. He's just insanely beefy on the Phoenix, and in my opinion, stupidly forgiving, which should not be the case. I would like to see him at least lose the Potion of Kuroi when he's on the Phoenix. Honestly, he should lose the Phoenix, period, outside of campaign. I don't see the justification whatsoever for Teclis getting the Phoenix. I think it's completely busted, even though it's very expensive. The fact that Teclis, who's supposed to be essentially a wimp, who is powerful because he casts spells, is now also a stupidly good fighter on top of that, is just, in my opinion, ridiculous. You get... I don't even want to go into too much depth on this anymore, because the Teclis with the Phoenix is just nuts. And I'm very much not fond of this addition to the game. I don't care if it's in campaign, whatever. Get your power trip in campaign, but in multiplayer this should not be a unit. Then we do have the Fire Mage, who now gets access to the Sun Dragon. I do think this is a cool little addition. You can bring double dragon builds, rocking a Mage of Fire, but keep in mind you are bringing a Mage of and a Lord with like heals or something. But keep in mind, Mage of Fire. I think this is a little bit of a neat. It's something like the Empire Amber Wizard gets a Griffin. It's a cute little addition. It does give you Fear and Terror and a significant combat stats on a hero mage. But ultimately, the lore you get with that mage is not necessarily best synergized with the monster. Just like Lore of Beasts doesn't synergize that well with a Griffin. Lore of Fire doesn't synergize that well with a dragon. Like, yes, you can boost your own damage by getting Kindle Flame. But at the same time, you can't heal yourself. It's just like Lore of Beasts. You can summon a Manticore, but you can't heal your big monster. So you kind of almost need another caster. So it's got its limitations. The Sun Dragon isn't some crazy OP beast. So I think this is all fair and a cute little addition that could spice things up, give you a few cool optional builds here as High Elves. And finally, we do have the White Lions of Krace. This is a unit that got some massive buffs in this past patch. They got plus 2 HP per model, so they've gone up by 150 HP from their previous iteration. More importantly, they got plus 4 melee defense in exchange for 4 charge bonus, which is a insane buff in my opinion. You start battle here, and their combat stats with martial prowess are 38 and 40, which is amazing. Those are very high stats, and this unit only costs 800 gold, which in my opinion is just grossly overtuned. White Lions were already in a rather strong spot before this. Like, I say rather strong. They were in a good spot. They weren't OP. They weren't underpowered. They were respectable. And this pushes them into a tier where I think this is easily an 850 to 900 gold unit that, for reasons unknown, is this cheap. I would not be surprised if they won against Greatswords at this point, who are a 900 gold anti-infantry specialist. I think this is simply comes down to people griping about White Lions and using them incorrectly for a long time. And as a result, the unit got buffs that it just did not warrant or did not deserve. If CA does want to keep these guys at this stat level or even higher or whatever, I don't care, but the price needs to go up. This cannot be an 800 gold unit, and I don't think this is an 800 gold unit right now. Yeah, not a big fan of this change at all. But yeah, that is another change there for High Elf. So that's High Elf changes in a nutshell there. 2 that I think are cool. I like the Mage of Fire and the Prince/Princess mount option. I think it's a cute little addition that gives you some spices up your options. I think the White Lion change isn't something insanely OP, but I think it's not. I think it's just badly implemented. It should be coming with a nerf to cost, especially now the Silver and Guard are technically fulfilling that interim unit sort of blocking unit role. And Silver and Guard are probably also a bit overtuned, but you guys should get a slight price nerf. And Teclis, I just think is a really, really bad decision by CA. He does not need a monster's mount. He never did. He still doesn't. He's always been a really powerful Elf Lord. He's honestly been the second most powerful Elf Lord behind. The only reason Alariel beats him really is because of Star. And now it's just there's Teclis is, in my opinion, is probably going to be one of, if not the most powerful Elf Lord options. Because on the Phoenix is just insane. And I really do hate the fact that he's been moved this way. There's no reason he deserves a monster's mount. So it ticks me off a whole bunch. So before I rant and rave about this more, we're going to move on to some of the other changes. So The last handful of highlights here, a bit of a smattering of different factions, and we're just going to start off with the Empire. The Empire got some pretty significant changes. Boris Todbringer himself has lost the leadership debuff on Crush the Weak. And in turn, he's gained Blood Roar on the Griffin. People are calling this a straight buff. In my opinion, it's a bit of a side grade. I'm actually not super fond of this because I'm probably one of the few people, granted, but I'm someone who ran Boris quite a bit on horseback in quite a few matchups where I found that extra -4 leadership just a nice little perk to have. If all you're bringing is Boris, then yes, and you only bring him on a Griffin, then yes, I do think this is an improvement, because obviously you now get -8 leadership rather than -4. If you are trying to do terror out wombo combos, then once again, the loss of a -4 leadership, if you're trying to stack alongside an Ever Wizard with Blood Roar, is a downside. So I think calling it a side grade is probably the best way to go, but I do think it's going to, well, it's going to shake things up a little bit. It's going to make those terror routing builds a bit less potent and probably a little less advised, I guess, for Empire. You're not going to see Amber Wizard plus Boris anymore, but I don't think it's a huge shake-up to the meta. And do keep in mind that the Crush the Weak is now cheaper. It is now a common skill rather than a unique one. Besides that, we do have Felix, who obviously is available to more factions than just Empire, but he has received changes to the Blood Oath. It now only affects 2 characters, but one of those is himself, so it now only affects the nearest Lord or Hero when the regen on Blood Oath. I think that's a good change. It's going to make those annoying death balls where you see Felix, Gotrek, and like a Rune Lord or something less viable. I'm definitely not I don't think that's a bad change. I think this is a good implementation that hopefully breaks up that very annoying sort of bunker or hero bunker style of play. Besides that, we do have the War Wagons, and both variants got some major changes here. Vanilla War Wagon over here, these guys now do significantly more missile damage. 5 and 25. Obviously, it's all 6 guys shooting, so you do have 18. You do have 18 gunners in a unit. The damage output is now much better. They actually do more damage output overall than a unit of Outriders does. So if you can keep these guys alive, there's much more benefit to it over the course of a long game. They can do a lot of hurt. It's not necessarily the buff I was hoping for, but I do think it pushes War Wagons out of the trash tier and into a bit of a usable tier. I think that if you're playing an Empire Slow Kite, it was highlighted by myself as well as Indy recently. We did some playtesting with that. I think that there's some potential for War Wagons to actually have use now, whereas before they were kind of a joke that you ignored. War Wagons Mortars also got massive buffs. They got an extra 6 ammo as well as 40 range. I'm personally not a fan of that change. I think it's way too much. Mortars as a unit or just a niche unit, and there's nothing wrong with that. The mortars just don't have too much use, and you can bring them against high elves, wood elves. There's a few niche matchups where you bring mortars, and they're not bad. But and because of that, War Wagon mortars were kind of a niche unit. Yes, they could have used like an extra 2 ammo or something in the original state. The reward over time was just not that good, but I don't think 6 ammo and 40 more range was necessary. The unit was, in my opinion, already a good spot. It's a bit much of a buff. I could see it getting a bit abusive or really annoying if you manage to play the protracted, drawn-out sort of Empire Kite strat. You could just whittle down your opponent's squishy troops over time, and I think for some factions it will be difficult to play against that, because Empire does have a very strong heavy cav core. Catching that is difficult. Obviously, against some factions, like Outriders with grenade launchers, while they are a very powerful unit, they also are very vulnerable to archers, so you won't bring them against a lot of factions. But a mortar, why not? You can kite away. You can sit out just outside your opponent's bow range and shell away at them. Or hell, you could almost sit in their bow range and tank the shots because you have 90 armor. So I think this could have some abuse potential, and I'm not a huge fan of that personally. Besides that, well, Vampire Count's Terrorgeist got a change. It now has 10 more melee attack, but in exchange, 10 less bonus first large, and it costs 50 more. I think it's generally a buff. It makes the Terrorgeist a little more useful in those late game situations when you need to cleave through infantry, where the Terrorgeist would kind of struggle or not get much value. It's not a great anti-infantry unit. itself. So I think this helps it a little bit without being overtuned or anything. Makes the vampires a little worse against large, which is always a struggle for them, but I don't think it's enough of a nerf to really be crippling. Not sneaky snakes. The snake riders here, the Necropolis Knights, I got a buff as well. They're now 50 gold cheaper. Got some tweaks to their melee defense and weapon strength. I do think these are some good buffs. Hopefully will make them a little more viable and something you see a little bit more on the battlefield. Though that low model count remains, I think, a bit of a bane of their existence, making them very vulnerable to surrounds and artillery fire. Finally, Mammoth's changes. And this is something I really don't understand. The Mammoth with the War Shrine costs the exact same as the War Mammoth. They both cost 2,100. The only difference is that the War Mammoth gets, oh man, these amazing javelins atop its howdah, which rock that wonderful bonus versus large. And obviously that is, when you're running your Norscan Kite strats, you want a Mammoth with javelins. And 30 more HP, because that allows you to tank 2 or 3 more pistolier shots. Just kidding, of course not. The War Mammoth is at, like, there's no reason to run a War Mammoth over a Mammoth with a War Shrine. War Shrine now gets encouraged. It gets the Giver of Glory, which is a point and click, plus 24 melee attack, 16 leadership, and fire damage to an ally, lasts for 30 seconds. And the Favor of the Ruinous Powers, which is another 10 leadership that stacks on top of encourage. So you're looking at a massive leadership buff on a faction that doesn't have the best leadership to begin with, plus point and click target attack buff versus a unit that just has some token javelins that guys on top lob. There's literally no reason that I see to run a War Mammoth over a War Mammoth with a War Shrine. So I'm kind of disappointed in that. I'm disappointed in the fact that War Mammoth's got a price buff to begin with. Obviously, they weren't that popular because Soul Crusher and the Lord variants of Mammoths are just stupidly good. Plus, of course, having to bring a Lord and Caster in a War Mammoth does get expensive. But I don't think War Mammoths deserved price buffs at all. They at 2,200, the unit was more than adequate. Same with the War Shrine. Really, if anything, the Lord variants of the Mammoths needed nerfs. Maybe some new Lord variants for Norsca to enable, especially like Caster Lords, to enable more, or to sort of encourage usage of normal War Mammoths rather than Lord War Mammoths. But yeah, I'm just not a big fan of this evening of costs or the changes in general here. But that is something that has happened with the War Mammoths. They are now much cheaper, and the War Shrine is just straight up better than the War Mammoth in all the ways that matter. But that is it for the major changes. Maybe one thing to touch upon a little bit is Pegasus Knights are a little better now, but I don't think that's anything huge. There's obviously been a bunch of small cost tweaks and some fairly big ones, but I don't, including the deck dropper buffs. But I don't think any of those are quite on par with these stat buffs. Necropolis Knights now have much better stats than they did, going up into 41 melee defense and all that. I think they're going to be a little more usable. War Mammoths got overbuffed. War Wagons got buffed well, I think. Not the buff I was hoping for, but I think it's a decent buff. And I think War Wagon Mortars are a little overtuned. So all in all, some solid changes here. That is it for this video. So you guys let me know. Do you think some of the other buffs that I just didn't mention in here were worth mentioning? Do you think they're going to shake up the meta a whole bunch? Do you think that my assessment here is incorrect or correct? Feel free to voice your opinions down below, and I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one. Waaagh for now.